Think about the last time you walked into a space and felt immediately that something was wrong. Not dangerous, not threatening, just wrong. Maybe it was a waiting room, an open plan office, a shopping mall at closing time. You couldn't explain it. There was nothing objectively bad about the place, and yet your body wanted to leave. Now think about the opposite, a space where you felt, without choosing to, that you could breathe. A room with high ceilings and afternoon light coming through large windows, a garden, a cathedral, a library with old wooden shelves. Here's the question nobody asks: why? Not, why do you prefer one over the other? We all have preferences. But why does a room, a physical arrangement of walls, light and material, have the power to change how you feel inside your own body? Welcome to 1% More. One video. 1% more than you knew before. For most of human history, architects relied on intuition. They didn't know why certain proportions felt right, why certain materials felt warm, why certain spaces made people want to gather and others made them want to disappear. They just knew, through centuries of accumulated practice, that these things were true. Then, in the early 2000s, a group of neuroscientists and architects decided to find out why. They called the field neuroarchitecture, and what they discovered changes everything about how you understand the spaces you inhabit every day. But before we get to the science, I want to tell you about a study that, when I first read it, I found almost impossible to believe. Researchers found that patients recovering from surgery in hospital rooms with a window facing a natural landscape recovered, on average, 1 full day faster than patients in identical rooms facing a brick wall. They needed less pain medication. They reported less anxiety. 1 day faster, less medication. Just from a window. That result was published in 1984, and yet most hospitals built since then still have corridors with no natural light, wards with no views of nature, and waiting rooms designed as if the mind and the body were completely separate things. Why? We'll come back to that. But first, let's understand what's actually happening in your brain when you enter a space. The moment you walk into a room, your brain begins processing it before you are consciously aware of doing so. A region called the parahippocampal place area, located adjacent to the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, activates immediately. It begins reading the space, its dimensions, its light, its complexity, its sense of enclosure or openness. It cross-references what it finds against everything you have ever experienced before. All of this happens in milliseconds. And before you have formed a single conscious thought about the room, your brain has already decided how it feels. This is why you cannot simply choose not to be affected by a space. The response is subcortical. It happens below the level of rational thought. Architecture speaks directly to the parts of the brain that are oldest and most fundamental. Now, what specifically does it respond to? Ceiling height. In 2007, researchers at the University of Minnesota ran a series of experiments in rooms with different ceiling heights. They found something elegant and surprising. High ceilings reliably activate what they call freedom thinking, abstract, creative, expansive thought. The mind literally opens with the space around it. Low ceilings, by contrast, activate confinement thinking, detail-oriented, focused, but also more constrained, more anxious. Neither is inherently bad. A surgeon needs confinement thinking, a poet needs freedom thinking. But most of us spend the majority of our lives in low-ceilinged offices, apartments, and commercial spaces, and we rarely stop to consider what that is quietly doing to how we think. Natural light. Your brain runs on a biological clock, the circadian rhythm, that is calibrated over millions of years of evolution to the movement of natural light across the day. Artificial lighting, particularly the blue-white fluorescent light that dominates most workplaces and public buildings, disrupts this clock. It suppresses melatonin at the wrong times, elevates cortisol, the stress hormone, and over time, quietly degrades mood, sleep, and cognitive function. Studies in office environments found that workers with access to natural light slept, on average, 46 minutes more per night than those without. They reported significantly lower levels of anxiety and higher levels of vitality. 46 minutes from a window, which raises something that I find genuinely troubling. If we have known this for decades, if the evidence has been clear, replicated, and published, why do we keep building spaces that make people feel worse? I have a theory about this, but it requires us to go back in time first. Here is what I find most remarkable about neuroarchitecture. It is not new knowledge. It is ancient knowledge rediscovered with instruments. Every great architectural tradition in human history, before neuroscience existed, before brain scans, before any of the studies I've described, understood intuitively that space shapes the mind. And they designed accordingly. Consider the Gothic cathedral. The architects of Chartres, of Notre Dame, of Cologne, they had no concept of the para-hippocampal place area. They didn't know about cortisol or circadian rhythms. But they understood, through centuries of accumulated observation, that a human being standing under a ceiling of 37 meters, surrounded by walls of colored light, in a space that dwarfs the body while elevating the eye, that human being would feel something specific. Oh, smallness. And paradoxically, through that smallness, a sense of being part of something much larger than themselves. That was the entire point. The architecture was not decoration, it was the message. Now consider the Japanese tea house. In the 15th century, the tea master Sen no Rikyu codified the principles of the tea ceremony, and with it, the design of the space where it took place. The entrance to a traditional tea house is deliberately small. So small that a samurai must remove his sword to enter and bow deeply to pass through. The ceiling inside is low, the garden outside is carefully composed, asymmetrical, natural, never overwhelming. Every element was designed to induce a specific mental state, presence, humility, calm attention. The Japanese called it wabi, a kind of beauty found in imperfection, simplicity, and transience. And the architecture was engineered, centuries before the word neuroarchitecture existed, to activate it. This intuitive understanding of how space shapes mind persisted through most of human history. And then, in the 20th century, something broke. The post-war housing crisis across Europe and North America created pressure to build fast and build cheap. The modernist ideal, honest materials, functional forms, efficiency above all, was adopted not for its philosophical elegance, but for its economic convenience. Concrete was cheap. Glass curtain walls were fast. Repetition scaled. What was lost in the rush was everything the body knew. The result was an experiment, conducted on millions of people without their consent, in spaces deliberately stripped of the elements the human brain had been calibrated by evolution to need: natural light, variation, human scale, proximity to nature, spatial complexity. And here is the troubling part. We measured the results. We published them. We knew, by the 1970s and 1980s, that people living in high-rise housing blocks had higher rates of depression, anxiety, and social isolation than people in lower-density environments. We knew that open-plan offices increased stress and reduced concentration. We knew that hospital design affected recovery times. We knew, and we kept building the same way. Which brings me back to the question I left open earlier. Why? Here is what I think is actually happening and why it matters beyond architecture. The way we build spaces is a reflection of what we value. And for most of the last century, what we valued in public buildings, in workplaces, in mass housing, was not the experience of the people inside them. It was efficiency, speed, cost per square meter. The human nervous system was, implicitly, treated as irrelevant to the design equation. But the nervous system has not been irrelevant. It has been responding, quietly, the entire time. Every hour you have spent in a low-ceilinged, artificially lit, nature-free environment has had a measurable effect on your stress levels, your sleep, your mood, and your capacity to think clearly. You didn't choose this. You weren't asked. It simply happened, because the people who designed those spaces were not thinking about your brain. This is the real insight of neuroarchitecture. Not that some buildings are nicer than others, but that the spaces you inhabit are continuously, invisibly, shaping who you are, your home, your office, the commute in between, the hospital where you wait for news, the school where you learned or failed to learn to love thinking. None of these spaces are neutral. They are all acting on you either with your well-being in mind or without it. And here is the part that I think is worth sitting with. Most of us have never thought about this. We have accepted our built environment, the way we accept the weather, as something that happens to us, not something we have any power over. But knowing this changes your relationship to space. It means you can begin to notice. To ask, not just, is this room attractive, but what is this room doing to me? To make choices where you can about the environments you spend your time in. And if you ever have the chance to shape a space, even a room in your own home, to understand that you are not just arranging furniture, you are designing an experience of being alive. The next time you walk into a space and feel, without being able to explain it, that something is wrong, trust that feeling. It is not oversensitivity. It is your nervous system reading the room correctly, reporting back faithfully on what it finds. And the next time you find a space that lets you breathe, notice what it is doing, the height of the ceiling, the quality of the light, the presence or absence of nature, the proportion of the walls. Because somewhere, at some point, someone made a decision that created that feeling in you. Architecture is not a background to life. It is one of the ways life speaks to us.